Hello everyone! When I asked you guys and girls for video requests, one name that popped up was none other than Cho'gall. He's my favorite hero to play within Heroes of the Storm. I can't believe that we haven't done a video on him yet, so let's dive right into it and let's begin the story. The ogre story that takes us back to the planet of Draenei, where he lived a privileged life within Highmaul, where he learned from the most talented ogre sorcerers. A two-headed ogre that was seen as an omen of good fortune, and he gained an immense following amongst Highmaul's common ogres, but not amongst the higher-ups. His arrogance and lust for power that put him at odds with the ruling elite. The high-ranking ogres, they feared that his growing popularity, that would one day allow him to seize control of the city. They couldn't let that happen, so they tried to assassinate him, an attempt which he just narrowly survived as he fled from Highmaul. Cho'gall at that moment wanted revenge, but he knew that he needed more power to make it happen. As he searched the world for knowledge and weapons, he came across the Shadow Council formed by Gul'dan, who had access to fell magic, more power that he hungered for. This was around the time where Kil'jaeden had found the Draenei living on the planet of Draenei, and he wanted them dead. They made contact with Gul'dan and manipulated events, promised the orc powers beyond his wildest dreams, and in exchange, he sold his people to the Legion. By manipulating events, they pitched the orcs against the Draenei, they formed a Horde, and they had Black Hand to lead it. Well, in reality, it was actually Gul'dan and his Shadow Council that were pulling the strings from behind the curtains. Gul'dan was intrigued by Cho'gall's confidence and lust for power, so he made the ogre-magi his foremost apprentice, and he taught him the secrets of fell magic. He even told him of the Burning Legion's existence. But Cho'gall, he didn't care. He was only interested in the power, and although he pledged his loyalties to Gul'dan, the moment that the Orc and the Shadow Council, the moment that they ceased being useful, he was prepared to turn his back on them. Now another that joined the Shadow Council, that was Garona half-Orcan, a half-Orc, half-Draenei slave who proved to be a ferocious fighter and possessed a keen intelligence and a gift with learning different languages. She eventually escaped from her enslavement and encountered the Shadow Council. Gul'dan sympathized with her to earn her trust, seeing how they both knew the pain of living as an outcast, and the moment that she let down her guard, the Shadow Council struck. They placed magical spells on her mind, spells which kept her obedient and allowed Gul'dan to see what she saw, and they used her as the perfect assassin, taking out the voices that rose up against the changes amongst the orcs. She and Cho'gall would have a lot of story together in the future, but we'll get to that later on. Let's first focus on the war on Draenei. While the Horde was forming and rising up, the Pale were doing pretty well in the catacombs beneath Necrand, and word of their otherworldly abilities that eventually reached Gul'dan. The Orc Warlock cared little for the stories, but Kil'jaeden was intrigued, and he pressed Gul'dan to ensure victory at any cost. That meant investigating the Pale and finding out if their magic could potentially strengthen the Horde. That was a job given to Cho'gall. The history of the Pale is that they used to be orcs that traveled to the Throne of Elements to seek the spirit's blessing. This was their rite of passage of becoming a shaman. When doing so, they enter a trance to attune their minds to the elements. While some are found worthy, others are not. When they reached beyond the veil of the physical world, some of them found themselves not reaching out to the elements, but instead found something much darker. These poor souls accidentally glimpsed a realm beyond Draenei, the realm of the void, and what the orcs saw drove them insane. The ones who actually survived communing with the Dark Ones, they were exiled from their clan, white skulls tattooed on their faces marking them as dead to their people, and they were forced to live in the caves beneath Necrand. When the Draenei crash landed on their planet, the Naru had turned from the light to the void, and he was now spewing out void energies that drew the attention of the Pale. They started to tap into the void energies that bled from Kur and seeped into the ground. Through the study of this power, the outcasts were able to speak with the Void Lords, and the Void Lords that were those dark entities responsible for sending out the old gods in the hopes of corrupting a slumbering titan spirit. These monstrous entities responded to the orcs, bombarding them with visions of apocalypse and revealing the secrets of using their shadow magic. Over time, the void energies would turn the Exile skin a sickly white, and they would call themselves the Pale. So Cho'gall, he was sent to check out the Pale, and if they proved as mighty as the rumors claimed, he was commanded to bring them into the Horde. Cho'gall stormed into the Pale's underground caves, expecting a fight, but the Pale, they did not resist his intrusion. They were quite eager to share their prophecy of doom, which they called the Hour of Twilight. They saw this as a time when shadow would envelop the entire universe and snuff out all life in existence.
Make peace with your end, for the hour of twilight falls.
Like with Gul'dan, Cho'gall didn't really care about what they believed in. Their prophecies of doom meant very little. He was far more interested in the power that they had, their ability to wield shadow magic, something that he had never experienced. This would serve as a potent weapon for the Horde, so to win the Pale over, he claimed that the Horde was a means to an end, a weapon by which they could bring about their hour of Twilight. The Pale reveled in this opportunity to serve as agents of Apocalypse. They joined the Horde and they formed a brand new clan known as the Twilight's Hammer clan. And as Cho'gall learned to master the shadow magic, he also began to see the truth in the Pale's prophecy. The war with the Draenei that eventually came to an end, with the major cities brought low and nearly all of the Draenei wiped out. Black Hand, now officially in the role of war chief, he was not done quite yet, as he set his eyes on the rest of the world, making sure that the orcs dominated the planet of Draenor. The Warsong clan, together with the Twilight's Hammer clan, they were sent out to topple the ogre bastion of Heimal. Now both Grommash Hellscream and Cho'gall, they both took part at the siege, and both were quite happy with the opportunity to slay all these ogres. For Cho'gall, this siege was the opportunity that he had been waiting for, the vengeance upon those who had exiled him from the city. He personally sought out and killed the stronghold's leader, Imperator Margok. Both were two-headed ogres, both were very gifted sorcerers, but only Cho'gall had learned the secrets of both fell magic and the void. With these powers under his control, he bound Margok to his throne, and he burned the ogre-mage alive.
Your reign has come to an end. The infinite night begins. Darkness come. I am king.
So here we are. The orcs have done what Kil'jaeden asked of them. They've nearly exterminated all of the Draenei and conquered most of the planet, but it came at a great price. Demon blood was now pumping in their veins, the use of fell magic had corrupted their planet, and worst of all, Kil'jaeden had stopped communicating with Gul'dan. The Dark Titan Sargeras, he saw the orcs as a great opportunity, a great weapon which he could unleash upon Azeroth to weaken his defenses and get it ready for another invasion from the Legion. He was the one who ordered Kil'jaeden to remain silent, to not deliver the promised power to Gul'dan, since the Horde was flush with victory and that made them arrogant and hard to control. He needed them to become desperate, on the brink of self-destruction, so desperate that they would do anything if it meant saving their race. Years went by, years with silence, hunger, orcs turning on each other, some of them even falling to madness, until the time was right. Sargeras' spirits had infiltrated the Guardian of Azeroth named Medivh, that which was supposed to guard the planet from threats like the Legion, that had actually fallen into their hands. Medivh made contact with Gul'dan. He showed him the world of Azeroth, a world with food, space, and plenty of enemies for the orcs to kill. They built up the Dark Portal, they connected the two planets with each other, and the first Horde invasion could begin. An invasion which Cho'gall and the Twilight's Hammer joined. Stepping onto Azeroth, a planet infected by the old gods, the dark creatures of the Void. It was quite an experience for them. The Void's call had become louder and clearer than it ever had, driving the orcs into a state of ecstasy. This was seen as a sign of destiny. They had found a place where they belonged, where they would bring about the hour of Twilight. The old god's presence had a profound impact on Cho'gall. He had believed that the Void was a powerful force, but he still didn't care for the Twilight Hammer's prophecies and their dark gods. But here on this planet, he had undeniable proof of their existence. Now hearing these whispers, it had a bit of an effect on the Twilight Hammer, as they became disobedient and sometimes simply wandered off, never to be seen again. Warchief Blackhand thought about making an example out of them by erasing the entire clan from existence, but Cho'gall intervened. He told them that the hour of Twilight was near and that the Horde's success would be the best way to bring that moment to fruition. Until then, they simply needed the Horde. They needed to keep up appearances with Black Hand and obey their true masters in secret. The clan, they agreed with his words. Cho'gall became their official chieftain, and the Twilight's Hammer became obedient, effective soldiers, while in secret, all they did was in the name of the dark gods. The old gods seemed to be happy with the Horde's lust for war and destruction, so it was no great sacrifice to continue with the conquest of the world. As the weeks went by and Cho'gall attuned himself more to the old gods, he branded the Twilight's Hammer prophecies onto the skin of some of the pale orcs. He then cut off their flesh to form pages, to create a book that codified the teachings about the Void. This book, called the Twilight Canticle, it would become a source of power and motivation for the followers of the old gods for decades. Now I tried to find out what exactly happened to this book, if it played any major role in the storyline, but apparently it hasn't really been used yet, so that story might be a topic for the Chronicles Volume 3. Now, despite the Guardian secretly being corrupted, conquering the humans was not that easy. Not all of the clans had stepped through the Dark Portal. The years of war and hunger, it had weakened them. So Gul'dan, he fought back to their time on Draenor, fought back to how he had empowered the Horde by breaking the world's elements and infused their energy into the orcs. Seeing how Azeroth also had elemental spirits far stronger than those on Draenor, he figured that they could do the same here, and his Shadow Council spies, they informed him about massive elemental activity near a smoldering volcano called Black Rock Mountain. Cho'gall did indeed confirm the reports, but he kept some information to himself. He did indeed sense the elemental power within the mountain, but it also discovered that these spirits were actually in league with the old gods. When the Shadow Council tried to conquer the mountain, they found out that the level of raw elemental might, it was simply too great. They were burned from the inside, as this was the domain of Ragnaros the Firelord, he who commanded innumerable lesser elementals, as well as the Dark Iron Dwarfs, who, in ages past, they had been foolish enough to unleash his might back onto the world. Before there would be outright war, Cho'gall worked towards peace. His connection to the old gods, it allowed him to step into the mountain, and after extensive conversations with the dwarves and Ragnaros' elemental lieutenants, an accord was reached. The Dark Ones, the old gods, they were delighted with the work that the Horde was doing, and they weren't against helping, but they had no intention of giving even a scrap of power to the Burning Legion puppets. Let's not forget that Sargeras' whole reason of forming the Burning Legion, that was actually to stop the Void Lord's plans, so instead of giving them power, they did allow the Shadow Council to set up a small refuge called Blackrock Spire, high up in the mountain. If their warlocks would stay in that area, then they would not be disturbed by Ragnaros or his followers. Gul'dan was of course disappointed that they had failed in conquering the mountain's power, but a refuge would do. Tensions between Blackhand and Gul'dan, they were rising, so a place away from the war chief eyes, that was priceless. Blackhand was told about their failure, and he had expected nothing less. He was more than ready to crush Stormwind City without the help of stolen elemental power, but the city was not without its defenses. As Kil'jaeden, Deadeye, and Cho'gall were ordered to lead the assault, and when Lothar, he took the bulk of their soldiers behind the Horde lines, cutting a massive line through their forces. Bleeding Hollow and Twilight's Hammer, they had to break off their attack and try to push back the knights in the rear, but this only worked to the humans' advantage as it allowed Stormwind to open its gates and strike the orcs like a hammer to Lothar's anvil. There was no way that the orcs could fight off the assault from both sides, so the only choice was to run. It was the biggest disaster that the Horde had ever suffered. Blackhand was furious, nearly executed Kil'jaeden and Cho'gall on the spot, but the Horde was pushed back, and for the moment they had to come up with a new plan of attack. Meanwhile, Garona half-Orcan had also joined this Horde invasion, and she had made contact with Medivh. Medivh, the real Medivh, felt sympathy for her, seeing how she was an outcast, and he was intrigued by her intelligence, by her entire existence. It was clear that Garona was no threat to him, and thanks to Gul'dan's endless cruelty, she had no real love for the Horde. He decided that it would be more valuable to have her as an ally or even a friend amongst the orcs than another spirit haunting his home, so he invited her to come back whenever she liked. She did just that, something that Medivh's new apprentice Khadgar could not really appreciate at first, but over time they developed a friendship and they even discovered that it was Medivh who had opened the portal. They quickly escaped the tower to get help from Stormwind, and when Gul'dan realized that Garona was in the same room as Kil'jaeden, remember, he could see what she could see, he tried to use his magic to force her to kill the king, but Garona was actually able to resist that murderous urge. Lothar, Khadgar and Garona, they then confronted the Guardian, and in that battle, Medivh assaulted her mind, tried to take control of Gul'dan's mental chains and use her against her allies, but it was only partially effective. Confusion rippled through the half-orc as she soon found it impossible to see the difference between friend or foe. She fled the tower and made her way back to Stormwind to inform Kil'jaeden of what had happened, but standing near the king, something snapped in her mind. She had resisted Gul'dan's order to kill the king before, but her fight with the Guardian, it had scrambled her thoughts. The line between friend and foe blurred. Her willpower faltered, and with tears streaming down her face, she obeyed the command and plunged a dagger into Lane's heart. Garona escaped to keep in the confusion that followed, and without their king, Stormwind eventually fell to the Horde, forced to flee to the lands of Lordaeron. While Medivh was taken care of, Gul'dan had actually been busy trying to search his mind to find more information on the Tomb of Sargeras, that which was promised to him if he was able to conquer the world. As Gul'dan had been left empty-handed before, he figured that it was wiser to get the information on his own terms, but unfortunately, while he was probing around in Medivh's mind, that was the time where they killed him, which left the orc in a coma. This was the moment that Orgrim Doomhammer had been waiting for. He had been informed about the corruption of the Horde by his friends Durthan and Draka of the Frostwolf clan, Thrall's parents, who both lost their lives for giving having this information, Doomhammer had enough of the corruption and the lies and decided that it was time to take control of the Horde. He challenged the Warchief Blackhand to Makora, a duel to the death to claim the title of Warchief. With the mighty Doomhammer in hand, Orgrim was able to secure victory. He told all of them that they had been used and lied to, and made ready to cleanse the corruption from the Horde, starting with the Shadow Council. As she was fleeing from Stormwind, Garona had been captured by the Horde, and she was tortured for information to figure out where the Shadow Council was hiding. She told them about their hideout in Blackrock Spire, and a large force of Horde soldiers, they stormed the smoldering volcano. None of the fire elementals or the dark iron dwarves stood in their way, while Ragnaros and the old gods, they kept their presence hidden, eager to see how this violent situation would play out. The Shadow Council warlocks, they could do little to save themselves from so many. Not even their fell powers were enough to hold them all off, but a few of them were able to survive. Amongst them was Cho'gall. Without him, the Twilight's hammer would fall to madness again, and Orgrim could not afford to lose their fighting force. He also swore his allegiance to their new warchief, claiming that he was manipulated into Gul'dan's service. Orgrim wasn't too sure if the ogre told the truth, but he also didn't really care. He needed their fighting power to protect the new land, and Cho'gall had already proven his usefulness to him by introducing him to the Dark Iron Dwarves. The dwarves, secretly commanded by Ragnaros, they agreed to let the Horde claim Blackrock Spire as its new headquarters. Since the old gods, they were delighted to see what chaos the orcs would bring to the planet.
Your petty quarrels only make me stronger.
Orgrim also spared Garona. It was no secret that Gul'dan had been cruel to her, and her assassination of King Lane, that had been very helpful. She too swore allegiance to the Horde, and Orgrim gave the job of looking after her to one of his most trusted lieutenants, namely Eitrigg. So what about Gul'dan? Well, he eventually woke up from his coma to see that his world has changed. There was a new warchief, his Shadow Council was nearly annihilated, and Orgrim was just about ready to take his head. In order to save himself, Gul'dan convinced him to keep him around. Since he would have need of his magics, he would give them new warriors to help with the war, to help with their conquests. Reluctantly, Orgrim did give him a chance, and for a while, Gul'dan wondered on how to deliver on this promise. He needed to regain a foothold, regain some forces, so it was very important that the troops that he was going to make, that they would secretly pledge their loyalty to him, so his mind turned towards the fallen Shadow Council. The members were dead, but their spirits still remained intact. If Gul'dan could bring them back from the grave, he believed that they would be forever grateful to him. He would melt their spirits with the corpse of Stormwind's greatest knights. Since using orcs and ogres, that was out of the question. The Horde would never approve, so Gul'dan and Cho'gall, they went to work. They conducted bloody ritual after bloody ritual, failed time and time again, until they finally succeeded. Gul'dan fused the spirit of his old ally Terangor to the corpse of a fallen Stormwind knight. Necromantic energy surged through the rotting body and raised it into undeath. The shambling skeletal horror became known as Terangor Fiend, and he was the first of what Gul'dan would call the Death Knights. Despite his wishes, these Death Knights felt no real loyalty towards Gul'dan, nor did they feel it towards the Horde. All they cared about was their own survival. The Horde worked on building up their fleet and going forward with the conquest of the world, while the Alliance of Lordaeron, they rose up to fight against them. When the Horde eventually reached Quel'Thalas, the kingdom of the High Elves, they discovered that there was a magical barrier around the city, which kept their use of magic hidden from the outside world, while also preventing invaders from using magic of their own. This shield was being maintained by several runestones, which presented an opportunity for Gul'dan. He figured that if they would dismantle one of these runestones, then not only could they disrupt the barrier, they could also use it to strengthen the Horde by turning it into something called an Altar of Storms. Cho'Gall's people, they had long ago created a ritual which allowed them to channel raw arcane magic into regular ogres, turning them into the highly intelligent two-headed ogre-magi. Orgrim still did not trust Gul'dan, but the orc warlock had done nothing to set him off recently, and they could definitely use the additional power, so he allowed them to get to work, which would prove to be a very big mistake. Gul'dan had no love or loyalty for the Horde, only for his own plans in mind, and the new ogre-magi in secret pledged their loyalty to him. Now, all that he needed to do was waiting for the right time to make his move. Despite the magical barrier falling, Silvermoon and the High Elves, they were not defenseless, and they were able to cast a new shield around their city, powered by the Sunwell. Doomhammer was quickly losing his patience. Quel'Thalas had never been the main target, Lordaeron's capital was, and he wanted to move on with their forces. Gul'dan reassured him that they had found a new way around the Elf shield and would only need a few more days to get through. Orgrim gave Gul'dan some of the forces and 3 days to finish the job, while the rest of them, they marched on to Lordaeron's capital city. The perfect opportunity for Gul'dan to betray the Horde, as he took his forces, including Cho'Gall and his clan, to their true destiny, the tomb of Sargeras. The power contained within, they would be his, as they used their magic to raise it above the water. When Doomhammer found out about this betrayal, as you might imagine, he wasn't too happy. They had not been able yet to siege the capital city, and their reinforcement routes, they were now cut off. Gul'dan's betrayal meant that they had failed, and they had no other option than to retreat all the way back to Blackrock Mountain. The betrayal would not go unpunished though, as Orgrim sent out the Blacktooth Green clan, led by Doran the main Black Hand, which you might remember from Upper Blackrock Spire, and they approached the island not long after the tomb had surfaced. Gul'dan, with a few of his followers, they quickly went in, leaving Cho'gall and the Twilight Hammer behind to hold off their enemies. Inside, the Orc Warlock did not find the power that he so desired, only his demise, while Cho'gall nearly lost his life. He survived only because his Twilight Hammer followers put him on a ship, while the winds carried the vessel west into uncharted waters. The war was lost by the Horde, as the Alliance was able to claim victory at Blackrock Mountain. Now they would come back for a second invasion, one in which eventually the Alliance, they decided to step through the Dark Portal and take the battle to the Hordes. When they did, Garona of Orkhan wanted to join Khadgar in the expedition, even if it was only in secret. She'd been able to escape from Ettrick, but found that the Shadow Council, that they still had a dark presence in her mind, trying to bend her thoughts. Slowly, patiently, she fought her way back into control, and when she was confident that she could resist their orders, she had sought out Khadgar and explained to him what had happened, why she had betrayed them, and why she had murdered the king. The mage, he believed her. The evidence was right in front of him, as he could see their spellwork still woven through her thoughts, which meant that at least one member of the Shadow Council was still alive on Azeroth. Over several months, Khadgar secretly met with Garona and carefully unraveled the Shadow Council's hold. He was successful, and for the first time in her life, Garona was free. In gratitude, she offered to do whatever she could to hunt down the Shadow Council on Azeroth, and when she asked him to join him into Draenor, he convinced her to stay behind and hunt down the Council. Hunt them down and kill them all. She picked up Cho'Gall's trail as her journey took her to the mysterious lands of Kalimdor, while Khadgar and the Sons of Lothar, they were eventually forced to shut down the Dark Portal and stay behind on Draenor. Cho'Gall and the Twilight Hammer clan, they knew nothing of Draenor's fate. Even if they had, it didn't really matter. The wisdom of the old gods were calling to them. Cho'Gall and his followers sailed towards the continent of Kalimdor in search of the Dark Masters, eager to help them bring about the Hour of Twilight. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we're going to end the story for today. Next week, we'll pick it back up with trying to figure out what exactly happened between Cho'Gall and Garona, since some of the events have changed with the Chronicles. There are also the events during the Cataclysm, and of course the alternate Cho'Gall, but like I said, that will be for next week. For now, thank you very much for watching, everyone. Subscribe if you like my videos, leave a like if you enjoyed this one, and until next time, guys, see ya!